The blood trickling down Maribel Carter's chin tasted like resolve. She stumbled through the darkness, her swollen eye nearly shut as she navigated by moonlight across the barren plains of New Mexico territory. The year was 1878, and tonight she had finally chosen freedom over fear. Behind her lay the remnants of her shattered life, a once promising marriage to wealthy rancher Theodore Barnes that had descended into nightmare. Her wedding ring was gone, sold in a whisper to a sympathetic shopkeeper's wife 2 towns back. The coins from that transaction were sewn into the hem of her dress, along with the last letter from her deceased mother. Everything else she owned was contained in a small cloth bundle clutched against her chest. 3 days she'd been walking, hiding during daylight hours, moving under cover of darkness. The bruises that painted her body in ugly purples and yellows had begun to fade at the edges, though the pain remained. Her ribs protested with each breath, a souvenir from the last time Theodore's fists had connected with her body. The horizon showed the first hints of dawn when Maribel's knees finally buckled. She collapsed onto the dusty ground, her energy spent, her throat parched beyond bearing. The water in her small canteen had run dry hours ago. She hadn't seen a settlement since yesterday morning, when she'd skirted wide around a small town, fearful that Theodore's men might be searching for her there. "I will not die here," she whispered through cracked lips, but her body refused to rise again. The bundle she carried slipped from her grasp as darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Her last conscious thought was a prayer not for salvation, but for the dignity of dying under the vast sky rather than beneath her husband's boot. The rhythmic sound of hoofbeats penetrated her unconsciousness. A dream, she thought, or perhaps death approaching. But then rough hands were turning her over, and a shadow blocked the rising sun. "Miss? Can you hear me? Miss?" The voice was deep, concerned. Not Theodore's. Not one of his men. Maribel forced her one good eye open to find herself staring up at a stranger's weathered face. His eyes were the precise blue of a summer sky, set in a sun-browned face beneath the brim of a dusty hat. "Water," she managed to rasp. Without hesitation, he lifted her head gently and pressed a canteen to her lips. The water was cool and tasted of life itself. "Easy now," he cautioned when she tried to gulp. "Too much at once will make you sick." When she had drunk enough to ease the worst of her thirst, the stranger eased her back down. His gaze took in her battered face, the dried blood on her dress, the thin gold band marking her finger where her wedding ring had been. "Name's Zachary Rollins," he said simply. "Got a small spread about 3 miles east of here. Looks like you could use some help, madam." Maribel tried to speak, to offer some explanation that wouldn't reveal too much, but exhaustion claimed her once more. She felt herself being lifted, cradled against a solid chest that smelled of leather and horses, before darkness reclaimed her completely. When Maribel next opened her eyes, she found herself in a small but clean bedroom. Sunlight streamed through curtained windows, illuminating simple furnishings: a washstand with basin and pitcher, a chair beside the bed with her bundle placed carefully upon it, a rag rug on the wooden floor. She attempted to sit up, only to gasp as pain flared through her ribs. "I'd take it slow if I were you," came a female voice from the doorway. Maribel turned to see an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes watching her. The woman carried a tray with a steaming mug and a bowl that smelled tantalizingly of chicken broth. "I'm Esther Davis. Zach brought you to my place. I'm his neighbor. Thought you might feel more comfortable waking up with another woman nearby rather than in a bachelor's home." "Thank you," Maribel whispered, easing herself carefully into a sitting position. "How long have I been here?" "Just since this morning. It's nearly supper time now." Esther set the tray on the bedside table and helped arrange pillows behind Maribel's back. "I cleaned you up a bit while you were sleeping, but didn't want to disturb you too much. You've got some nasty injuries, child." Maribel's hand instinctively went to her face, feeling the swelling that had begun to subside. My husband, she admitted quietly. I left him. Esther nodded, unsurprised. Figured as much. You're safe here for now. No one will find you at my place. It's off the main roads, and I don't get many visitors except Zach. Mr. Rollins, is he here? He's outside, tending to his horse. Said he'd come check on you when you're feeling up to visitors. Esther handed Maribel the mug of tea. This'll help with the pain. Then you should try to eat something. Maribel sipped the tea gratefully. It was sweet with honey and had a bitter herbal undertaste that she recognized as willow bark. I can't stay long. Theodore, my husband, he'll be looking for me. You let us worry about that for now. You're in no condition to be traveling. Esther's tone was gentle but firm. Finish your tea, have some broth, and rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to make decisions. Maribel wanted to argue, but exhaustion and pain kept her silent. She managed half the broth before her eyes grew heavy again. When she woke next, night had fallen. A lamp burned low on the table beside her, and in its glow sat Zachary Rollins, his hat on his knee, his attention on a book in his hands. He must have sensed her watching because he looked up immediately. Evening, madam. Hope I'm not disturbing you. Maribel shook her head slightly.
No.
Thank you for your help, Mr. Rollins. Zach, please. He closed his book. She could just make out that it was a volume of poetry, surprising for a cowboy. How are you feeling? Better. It wasn't entirely a lie. The pain had dulled to a persistent ache, and her head felt clearer.
I'm Maribel Carter.
She gave her maiden name automatically, a small act of reclaiming herself. Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Carter. She didn't correct his assumption that she was unmarried. The fewer people who knew her true identity, the safer she would be. I'm grateful for your kindness, but I should move on as soon as possible. Zach studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Esther says you're running from your husband. Maribel tensed. I don't wish to trouble you with my problems. No trouble. Just wondering if you've got somewhere safe to go. The directness of his question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on escaping that she hadn't planned beyond putting distance between herself and Theodore. I have an aunt in Colorado, she said finally. I haven't seen her in years, but she might take me in. Zach nodded, considering this. That's a fair journey from here, and not an easy one, especially for a woman traveling alone. I don't have much choice. Maribel's voice caught. He'll kill me if he finds me. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of her admission. I've got a proposition for you, Zach said finally. I could use help around my place. Nothing strenuous, just cooking and keeping house while you heal up. In return, you'd have a roof over your head, food, and wages that could help you get to Colorado when you're ready. My ranch is isolated enough that few people come calling, and those who do have no reason to mention you to anyone. Maribel regarded him warily. She'd learned the hard way that men's kindness often came with hidden costs. Why would you help a stranger this way? Zach's expression softened slightly. My sister was married to a man who treated her the way yours treated you. She didn't make it out. He said it simply, a fact stated without embellishment, but Maribel could hear the old pain behind the words. I reckon helping you might balance that scale somewhat. Maribel considered her options. Her money would barely get her to the next town, let alone all the way to Colorado. And in her current condition, finding work elsewhere would be difficult. I accept your offer, she said finally, but only until I'm well enough to travel. Zach nodded, standing up and placing his hat back on his head. That's fair. We'll head to my place tomorrow if Esther agrees you're fit to move. It's not much, but it's peaceful. After he left, Maribel lay awake in the darkness, wondering if she'd made the right decision. Theodore Barnes was not a man who forgave or forgot. He'd spent the first year of their marriage isolating her from family and friends, the second breaking her spirit, and the third breaking her body. She had no illusions about what would happen if he found her. But for tonight, at least she was safe. And that was more than she'd had in a very long time. True to his word, Zach returned the next morning with a wagon. Esther helped Maribel dress in clean clothes, one of Esther's old dresses, altered hastily to fit Maribel's slighter frame, and packed a basket of food and medicines. "You come visit me when you're stronger," Esther insisted as she helped Maribel into the wagon. "And if that man of yours comes sniffing around, you can be sure I'll send him in the wrong direction." "Thank you," Maribel said, squeezing the older woman's hand. "For everything." The journey to Zach's ranch took nearly an hour, jolting over uneven terrain. Maribel gritted her teeth against the pain each bump caused her ribs, but didn't complain. Zach seemed to sense her discomfort anyway, slowing the horses whenever the path grew particularly rough. "Almost there," he assured her as they crested a small rise. Before them stretched a modest ranch nestled against the backdrop of distant mountains. A one-story house of weathered wood stood surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. A small garden plot lay to one side, and beyond it, a creek wound its way across the property, bordered by cottonwood trees. It wasn't grand by any means, but there was a peaceful solidity to it that immediately appealed to Maribel. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Zach seemed pleased by her assessment. "Been working this land for 7 years now. Started with nothing but that cabin and 2 horses." He guided the wagon toward the house. "It's not much compared to some of the big spreads around here, but it's mind-free and clear." The inside of the house was simply furnished but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy table at the other. 2 doors led off this central room. "Bedrooms through there," Zach said, nodding toward one door. "You'll take that. I'll bunk in the lean-to out back, got it fixed up nice enough." Maribel started to protest, but Zach held up a hand. "No arguments. You need proper rest to heal, and I'm used to sleeping rough when I'm out with the herd." The next few days fell into a simple rhythm. Maribel's strength returned gradually, though the pain in her ribs persisted. True to his word, Zach didn't expect much of her at first, just simple tasks like preparing meals from the supplies he provided. He spent most daylight hours tending to his small herd of cattle or working on endless ranch chores, coming in only for meals and after sundown. During those quiet evenings, they began to know each other in small increments. Zach, she learned, had come west after the war, where he'd fought for the Union despite being from Tennessee. He tried his hand at mining and freight hauling before saving enough to buy this land. He spoke little of his family beyond the sister he'd mentioned, though Maribel gathered they were no longer in his life. For her part, Maribel shared carefully edited versions of her past. She told him about growing up the daughter of a schoolteacher in Missouri, about losing both parents to influenza when she was 19. She mentioned meeting Theodore, though never by name, while working as a companion to a wealthy woman in St. Louis, and his courtship that had seemed so promising. "He was charming at first," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, Zach mending a bridle while she darned a sock. "Attentive, generous. It wasn't until after we were married that things changed." Zach's hands stilled on his work. "They usually wait until they've got you trapped," he said quietly. "My sister's husband was the same way. Fooled everyone, even me. The worst part was how he made me doubt myself," Maribel continued, the words coming easier in the firelight's gentle glow. "Made me believe I was worthless, that no one else would want me. After a while, I started to believe him." "What changed?" Zach asked. "What made you leave?" Maribel's hands trembled slightly as memories surfaced. "He always said if I tried to leave, he'd kill me. And I believed him. But then one night, she faltered, then drew a steadying breath. He was more violent than usual. When he finally passed out drunk, I realized something. I was going to die either way. Either by staying and enduring more beatings, or by trying to escape. At least if I ran, I'd die free." Zach's gaze met hers across the small space between them, something fierce and protective flaring in those blue eyes. "You're not going to die," he said with quiet conviction. "Not while I have anything to say about it." As days turned into weeks, Maribel found herself settling into life at the ranch. Her bruises faded, and though her ribs still ached when she moved too quickly, she was able to take on more household tasks. She planted vegetables in the neglected garden, scrubbed the cabin until it gleamed, and began putting up preserves from wild berries she gathered along the creek. Zach noticed and appreciated these efforts, though he never demanded them. Often she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something between wonder and concern. "You don't have to work so hard," he told her one afternoon when he found her on her knees scrubbing the porch. "You're still healing." Maribel sat back on her heels, wiping perspiration from her brow with the back of her hand. "I like being useful. Besides, it helps me not to think too much." Zach considered this, then nodded. "Well, at least take breaks when you need them. And don't lift anything heavy, those ribs need time." His concern was so genuine, so different from Theodore's controlling demands, that Maribel found herself smiling. "Yes, sir, Mr. Rollins." The ghost of an answering smile played around his lips. "Sass doesn't become you, Miss Carter." But the warmth in his eyes belied his stern tone. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. The wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows and sending debris skittering across the yard. Maribel jumped at each crash of thunder, her nerves on edge. "Storm making you nervous?" Zach asked, noticing her flinch as lightning split the sky. "It's not the storm," she admitted. "Theodore, my husband, he was always worse during storms. Said the thunder put a devil in his head." Zach's expression darkened momentarily. Then, surprisingly, he reached for a shelf and pulled down a worn deck of cards. "My mother always said the best way to weather a storm was with a good game of cards. You know how to play poker?" Maribel shook her head. "Well then, I'll teach you. Nothing like learning to bluff to take your mind off troubles." By midnight, Maribel had learned the basics of poker and won 3 hands running, much to Zach's mock dismay. The storm had moved on, leaving behind only gentle rain pattering on the roof. For the first time in years, Maribel found herself laughing freely, the weight of fear temporarily lifted from her shoulders. "You're a natural," Zach said, gathering up the cards. "Should take you to town for the Saturday night game. You'd clean out every cowhand between here and Santa Fe." The mention of town sobered Maribel instantly. "I can't go to town. It's not safe." Zach's expression grew serious. "I didn't mean it literally. But Maribel, you can't hide forever. Sooner or later, you'll need to build a life beyond running." "I know," she said softly. "But first I need to get far enough away that he won't find me. Once I reach my aunt in Colorado." "And what then? Will you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder?" The question hit too close to the fear that had been growing in her heart. "What choice do I have? The law won't protect me. He's a respected rancher with friends in high places. I'm just a wife who ran away." Zach was silent for a long moment. "There are other solutions," he said finally. Maribel knew what he was suggesting. "I won't have another man's death on my conscience, even his. Not death. But there are ways to encourage a man to look elsewhere for his prey." Zach's voice had a hardness to it she hadn't heard before. Before she could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Maribel's heart lurched painfully as Zach rose, motioning for her to stay silent. He took his rifle from its place by the door before cautiously opening it. "Evening, Zach. Sorry to disturb you so late." The voice belonged to a man Maribel couldn't see from her position. Zach's stance relaxed slightly. "Marshall Turner. What brings you out in this weather?" "Looking for a fugitive. Mind if I come in for a minute? I'm soaked through." Maribel's blood ran cold. She glanced frantically around for somewhere to hide, but the cabin's simple layout offered few options. Zach glanced back at her, his expression conveying a clear message. Trust me. Of course, Zach said, stepping aside to let the visitor enter. Maribel, this is Marshall James Turner from over in Cimarron. Marshall, this is my cousin, Maribel Carter. She's staying with me while recovering from an illness. The Marshal, a grizzled man in his 50s with a drooping mustache, nodded politely in Maribel's direction. Madam, pardon the intrusion. Maribel forced herself to nod in return, hoping the lamplight wasn't bright enough to show the fear she knew must be written on her face.
Cousin.
Zach had given her a role to play, and she desperately needed to be convincing. Can I offer you some coffee, Marshall? She asked, proud that her voice barely trembled. That'd be mighty welcome, thank you. As she busied herself at the stove, Zach and the Marshal sat at the table. So, who are you hunting? Zach asked casually. Woman named Maribel Barnes. Ran away from her husband over in Santa Rosa about a month back. He's offering a substantial reward for information leading to her return. Maribel's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the coffee pot. She steadied herself against the stove, back turned to the men, and focused on controlling her breathing. What did she do? Zach's tone was one of mild curiosity. Husband says she attacked him with a kitchen knife, stole some valuables, then fled. Says she's not right in the head, prone to violent fits and fabricating stories. Wants her brought home so he can get her proper care. The lies, so plausible, so completely inverted from the truth, made Maribel's stomach clench. Of course Theodore would paint himself as the concerned husband, her as the unstable wife. Who would believe otherwise? Sounds dangerous, Zach commented. You think she's in this area? Got a report she was seen heading this way. Figured I'd check the outlying ranches. Not many women would survive long on their own in this country. Maribel brought the coffee to the table, careful to keep her face turned slightly away from the Marshal as she poured. Zach thanked her with a nod. My cousin's been with me nearly 3 weeks now, he said, the life flowing smoothly. Came down from Denver after a bout of pneumonia. Doctor recommended the drier air. The Marshal sipped his coffee, eyes moving between them. That right, Miss Carter? Maribel forced herself to meet his gaze. Yes, sir. My lungs have never been strong, but I'm improving daily thanks to Zachary's care. Something in her demeanor must have satisfied the Marshal, because he nodded and returned his attention to Zach. Well, if you do see any strange women in the area, you'll let me know? Barnes is offering $500 for his wife's safe return. That's generous, Zach said, his voice neutral. Must care for her a great deal. Says she's his whole world. The Marshal finished his coffee and stood. Thanks for the hospitality. I should continue my rounds before it gets any later. Zach walked him to the door. Good hunting, Marshal. Watch out for that creek crossing, it'll be running high after this rain. When the door closed behind the lawman, Maribel's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, trembling uncontrollably. Zach knelt beside her, his hands warm and steady as they covered hers. He's gone. You're safe. For now, she whispered. But he won't stop looking. And $500, people will be watching for me everywhere. Zach's jaw tightened. We need to get you far away from here, and soon. I've been thinking I have a friend who runs cattle drives up to Wyoming. He's leaving next week. If you traveled with them, disguised as a cook's assistant, you could get much farther north before continuing to Colorado on your own. The plan had merit, though the thought of leaving the safety of Zach's ranch filled Maribel with dread. Not just because of the dangers of a journey, she realized, but because in these few weeks, this place and this man had begun to feel like home. What about you? She asked. If Theodore learns you helped me, I can handle myself, Zach assured her. And once you're safely away, there'll be nothing to connect us. The thought should have been reassuring. Instead, it left a hollow ache in Maribel's chest. The next morning, Zach rode out early to make arrangements with his friend about the cattle drive. Maribel spent the day in a state of anxious anticipation, alternating between packing her meager belongings and staring out the window, half expecting to see Theodore's men approaching. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered again, promising another storm. Maribel was kneading dough for bread, a task that always helped calm her nerves when she heard hoofbeats in the yard. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by alarm when she realized there were multiple riders. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved cautiously to the window. 4 men on horseback were dismounting in front of the cabin. The one in the lead made her blood freeze in her veins. Even at this distance, she would know Theodore Barnes anywhere. His imposing height, the way he carried himself like he owned everything his gaze fell upon. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. Zach wouldn't be back for hours yet. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide that they wouldn't find her. For a wild moment, she considered taking Zach's rifle and making a final stand, but she knew she was no match for 4 armed men. A sharp knock rattled the door. "Mrs. Barnes? I know you're in there. Open up, or we'll break this door down." Theodore's voice, so controlled and reasonable, belied the violence she knew he was capable of. Maribel's mind raced. If she fled out the back, they would catch her before she reached the creek. If she hid, they would tear the cabin apart until they found her. There was only one option: to confront them directly and try to buy time until Zach returned. Taking a deep breath, Maribel opened the door. Theodore Barnes stood on the porch, elegantly dressed as always, his handsome face arranged in an expression of concern that might have fooled anyone who didn't know him as she did. Behind him stood 3 of his ranch hands, men who had witnessed her abuse and done nothing. "Maribel, my dear," Theodore said smoothly, "you've led us on quite a chase. I'm not going back with you." She was proud of how steady her voice sounded, even as her heart threatened to pound out of her chest. "Of course you are. You're unwell, darling." The doctor explained everything: how these delusions take hold of you, make you imagine terrible things. Theodore's voice carried just the right note of compassionate concern. "Everyone understands. No one blames you." He took a step forward, and Maribel involuntarily retreated. "Don't come any closer." Theodore's expression hardened slightly. "This is becoming tedious, Maribel. You've embarrassed me enough with this escapade. It's time to come home. This is my home now." The words surprised even her as they left her mouth. A dangerous smile curved Theodore's lips. "With a cowboy? How quaint." His gaze swept the cabin's interior. "Speaking of your host, where is he?" "Right here." The voice came from behind Theodore. Everyone turned to see Zach standing at the edge of the yard, rifle trained steadily on Theodore's chest. Beside him stood Marshal Turner and another man Maribel didn't recognize. "Rollins," Theodore acknowledged, his tone mild despite the weapon pointed at him. "I've come for my wife." "This doesn't concern you." "I believe it does," Zach replied evenly, "since she's on my property and has made it clear she doesn't want to go with you." Theodore's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My wife is unwell, prone to delusions and fits of violence. Surely the marshal has explained this to you?" "I have documentation from her doctor." "Funny thing about that," Marshal Turner said, stepping forward. "I've been making inquiries about you, Mr. Barnes. Seems your first wife died under mysterious circumstances. And the doctor who supposedly diagnosed Mrs. Barnes here? Can't seem to locate him." Theodore's expression didn't change, but Maribel could see the calculating look in his eyes. "These are serious and unfounded allegations, Marshal. I suggest you consider carefully before pursuing them further. I have influential friends." "So I've heard," the Marshal replied dryly. "But out here, your friends aren't around to help you. And I've got sworn statements from 3 of your former ranch hands about how they witnessed you beating your wife." Theodore's face darkened with anger. "This is preposterous. Maribel, tell them the truth." All eyes turned to her. For a moment, Maribel felt the old fear rising, the ingrained response to obey him, to accept punishment for defiance. But then her gaze met Zach's, and she saw in his eyes not pity, but respect and something deeper that gave her strength. "The truth," she said clearly, "is that you beat me within an inch of my life. That you threatened to kill me if I ever tried to leave. That I finally decided death while trying to escape was better than dying slowly at your hands." She stepped fully onto the porch, showing herself to the marshal. "These bruises are fading now, but they're still visible. I have scars that won't ever fade. That's the truth, Theodore." The marshal nodded grimly. "That's enough for me. Mr. Barnes, you're under arrest on suspicion of assault and attempted murder." Theodore's hand moved toward his jacket, but Zach's rifle barrel steadied. "I wouldn't," he warned quietly. For a tense moment, it seemed Theodore might risk it anyway. Then, with frightening suddenness, his demeanor shifted. The rage drained from his face, replaced by the charming smile that had once fooled Maribel. "There's been a grave misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "If my wife feels I've mistreated her, I'm deeply sorry. Perhaps a separation would be best while we resolve these issues. I'm sure we can handle this like civilized people, without resorting to legal measures." The marshal wasn't impressed. "Save it for the judge, Barnes." He nodded to the man beside him, who stepped forward with handcuffs. In that moment, Theodore's mask dropped completely. With a roar of fury, he lunged toward Maribel, hands outstretched as if to strangle her. She stumbled backward, but before Theodore could reach her, the crack of a rifle shot split the air. Theodore crashed to his knees, clutching his shoulder where blood blossomed through his expensive jacket. Behind him, Zach lowered his rifle slightly, ice cold. "Next one goes through your heart," he said quietly. "Give me a reason." The marshal moved quickly to secure Theodore, who was cursing through clenched teeth. His ranch hands, seeing their employer subdued, wisely raised their hands in surrender. "You'll never be free of me," Theodore spat at Maribel as the marshal dragged him toward a waiting horse. "No court will convict me. I'll find you wherever you go." "No, you won't," the marshal said grimly. "Because in addition to the assault charges, we're looking into the death of your first wife. Her brother never believed it was an accident, and he's been collecting evidence for years." The color drained from Theodore's face at this news. For the first time since Maribel had known him, he appeared genuinely afraid. As the marshal and his deputy led the prisoners away, Maribel sank onto the porch steps, overcome by the sudden release of tension. Zach sat beside her, his rifle laid across his knees. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Maribel nodded, though tears had begun to stream down her face. "I can't believe it's over." "How did the marshal?" "I've been corresponding with him since the night he came here," Zach explained. "Something about Barnes's story didn't sit right with him either. When I told him my suspicions, he started investigating. Turns out your husband has quite a history of violence that his money has helped cover up." "Will they really be able to convict him?" "The marshal seems to think so. And even if they don't, Barnes will be tied up in legal proceedings for months, possibly years. You'll have time to build a new life, wherever you choose to go." Zach hesitated. "You still planning to head to Colorado?" Maribel looked out across the land that had become familiar to her over these weeks, the garden she tended, the creek where she washed clothes, the distant hills where Zach's cattle grazed. In this place, she had begun to find herself again, to remember who she was before Theodore had systematically destroyed her confidence and sense of self-worth. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "I thought I needed to run as far as possible, but now." "You could stay," Zach said quietly. "Not as my housekeeper.
As
Whatever you want to be." Maribel turned to look at him, surprised by the vulnerability she saw in his expression. "What are you saying, Zachary?" He set the rifle aside and took her hands in his. "I'm saying that these weeks with you have been the best of my life. That watching you heal and grow stronger every day has been like watching a miracle unfold. That I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I found you in the dust." He paused, his thumbs gently stroking her knuckles. "But I also know you've been through hell, and the last thing you need is another man making demands on you. So I'm offering you a safe place, for as long as you want it, with no expectations beyond what you freely choose to give." Tears welled up again in Maribel's eyes, but these were different from the ones of relief she'd shed moments before. These were tears of a different kind of release, the realization that she was truly free to choose her own path for the first time in years. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've been falling in love with you too. But you're right, I need time. Time to heal completely. Time to remember who Maribel Carter is, separate from Theodore's wife." Zach nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We have all the time in the world now." As if to punctuate his words, the clouds that had been threatening all afternoon finally released their burden. Rain began to patter on the porch roof, but neither of them moved to go inside. Instead, Zach gently pulled Maribel closer, and she rested her head against his shoulder, watching the rain turn the dusty yard to mud. "I always hated storms before," she murmured, "but I think I might learn to love them now." Zach's arm tightened around her shoulders, and together they watched the cleansing rain wash away the footprints of the men who had come to drag her back to hell. As summer turned to fall, Maribel blossomed like the wildflowers that carpeted the hills after the August rains. The last of her physical injuries healed, though sometimes she still woke in the night, heart pounding from nightmares in which Theodore returned to claim her. On those nights, she would slip outside to sit on the porch, breathing in the clean desert air until her fears subsided. Often Zach would join her, seemingly attuned to her distress even from his quarters in the converted lean-to. He never pressed her to talk, simply offered his solid presence until she was ready to return to sleep. Their relationship evolved slowly, built on mutual respect and the careful rebuilding of Maribel's trust. Zach never pushed for more than she was ready to give, though his feelings were evident in the way his eyes followed her, in the small kindnesses he showed her daily. They began taking supper at Esther's place once a week, and occasionally rode into the small nearby settlement of Clearwater for supplies. Each venture into public spaces was a victory for Maribel, who had spent so long isolated by Theodore's jealous control. News came periodically from Marshall Turner. Theodore remained in custody, unable to secure bail due to the severity of the charges and the unexpected testimony of several prominent citizens of Santa Rosa who had witnessed his cruelty toward Maribel but had previously been unwilling to speak against a man of his standing. "They're saying he'll likely hang if they can prove he murdered his first wife," Zach told her one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the sunset paint the water gold and crimson. "The marshal thinks they have enough evidence." Maribel's response surprised even herself. "I hope they don't hang him." Zach looked at her questioningly. "Death would be too quick," she explained. "I want him to live a long life in a prison cell, powerless and forgotten. That would be true justice for a man who craved control above all else." Zach nodded slowly. "You're a remarkable woman, Maribel Carter." The use of her maiden name still gave her a small thrill. She had reclaimed it legally now, with the help of a lawyer in Cimarron who had filed for dissolution of her marriage on grounds of cruelty. Theodore, desperate to salvage something of his reputation, had not contested it. As October painted the cottonwoods along the creek in brilliant yellow, Zach received an unexpected letter that brought both opportunity and uncertainty into their evolving life together. "My uncle died," he told Maribel as they sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread before them. "Left me his ranch in northern Colorado. It's larger than this place, good water rights, better grazing land. Are you going to accept it?" Maribel asked, feeling a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of change. Zach looked at her thoughtfully. "I'm considering it. It would mean a fresh start. For both of us if you wanted." The implication hung in the air between them. This would be more than just a change of location, it would be a declaration of intent, a commitment to building a future together. "Is that what you want?" she asked softly. Zach reached across the table to take her hand. "What I want is to spend my life with you, Maribel. Whether that's here in Colorado or anywhere else doesn't much matter to me. But I won't ask you to tie your future to mine unless you're absolutely certain it's what you want to." Maribel's heart swelled with emotion. After Theodore, she had never expected to trust a man again, let alone love one. Yet here was Zach, offering her not just his heart, but the freedom to choose her own path. "I need time to think," she said honestly. Zach nodded, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "Take all the time you need." That night, Maribel lay awake long after the lamp was extinguished, examining her feelings. Her heart told her she loved Zach, his quiet strength, his unwavering respect for her boundaries, the gentle way he encouraged her independence even as he offered his protection. But a small, fearful part of her whispered warnings. What if this too changed once they were truly committed to each other? What if the pattern repeated itself? She rose before dawn and dressed quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the autumn chill. Outside, the world was still dark, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast New Mexico sky. Maribel walked to the creek, seeking clarity in the gentle sounds of flowing water and night creatures. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern horizon, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't turn, knowing instinctively who it was. "Couldn't sleep?" Zach asked, settling beside her on the fallen log that served as a bench. "Too many thoughts," she admitted. "I'm afraid, Zach." "Of what?" "Of making another mistake. Of trusting too easily. Of losing myself again." She looked at him directly. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that night you taught me to play poker during the thunderstorm. But loving someone and building a life with them are different things." Zach was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the lightening sky. "My father," he said finally, "was a hard man. Mean when he drank, which was often. He broke my mother's spirit long before consumption took her body. I swore I'd never become him." He turned to face Maribel fully. "I can't promise we'll never argue, or that I'll never say something thoughtless that hurts you. But I can promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. That I will never raise a hand to you in anger. That your freedom will always be as important to me as my own." Tears welled in Maribel's eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. "I believe you," she whispered. "God help me, I do." "Then marry me," Zach said simply. "Come to Colorado as my wife, not because you need my protection, but because we choose each other freely and completely." The first rays of sunlight crested the horizon as Maribel considered his words. In that golden light, she could see their potential future together, not perfect, perhaps, but built on mutual respect and genuine love. A future where she would be a partner, not a possession. "Yes," she said, the word feeling right on her lips. "I'll marry you, Zachary Rollins." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise itself. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Maribel met him halfway, their lips connecting in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they finally separated, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I'll spend my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I know," Maribel said, and she meant it. They were married 2 weeks later in Esther's front room, with Marshall Turner and the circuit preacher as witnesses. Maribel wore a simple blue dress that Esther had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Zach looked almost uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, but the expression on his face when he saw Maribel enter the room was worth every stitch of effort she'd put into her appearance. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zach's kiss was gentle and reverent, as if she were something precious he feared might break. Maribel surprised him and herself by deepening the kiss, drawing a chuckle from Marshall Turner and an approving nod from Esther. That night, as they lay together in what was now truly their home, Maribel felt the last of her walls crumbling. Theodore had used intimacy as another form of control, but with Zach, she discovered what it meant to be truly cherished. His touch was patient, his concern for her comfort genuine, and in his arms, Maribel found healing she hadn't known she still needed. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness when they finally lay still, her head pillowed on his chest. His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Mrs. Rollins. More than I have words to tell you." The name, her new name, freely chosen, filled her with warmth. This time, taking a husband's name didn't feel like erasure but like the beginning of a shared story. Winter settled over the land, bringing short days and long nights that the newlyweds spent planning their future. Zach had accepted his uncle's bequest, and they would head to Colorado in the spring once the mountain passes cleared. In the meantime, they prepared the ranch for sale, set aside what they would take with them, and dreamed of the life they would build together. Christmas brought an unexpected visitor, Marshall Turner, bearing news and gifts. "Thought you'd want to know," he told them over supper. "Barnes has been convicted. Not hanging, but 20 years hard labor. And with the evidence that's come to light, he's unlikely to ever see freedom again." Maribel received this news with a strange sense of detachment. Theodore seemed increasingly like a character from someone else's story, a nightmare figure whose power over her had finally been broken. "Thank you for letting us know," she said sincerely. "And thank you for believing me when so many others didn't." The marshal nodded, a bit uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just doing my job, madam. Though I brought something else you might appreciate more than news." He produced a small package from his coat. "This arrived at my office for you. From Santa Rosa." Curiously, Maribel unwrapped the package to find a small wooden box containing her mother's locket, the one possession Theodore had kept from her as punishment for some imagined transgression. Inside was the miniature portrait of her parents on their wedding day, precious beyond measure. "How?" she whispered, tears threatening. "Barnes's house was sold to cover legal costs and restitution," the marshal explained. "The new owners found this with your name on it and sent it to me, knowing I'd been involved in the case." Maribel clutched the locket to her heart, overwhelmed by this unexpected recovery of her past. Zach's arm came around her shoulders, his silent support giving her strength. "This is the best gift I could have received," she told the marshal. "It's like having a piece of my family back." Later, after their guest had gone, Zach helped her fasten the locket around her neck. His fingers lingered on her skin, warm and gentle. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "we could start our own family. If you wanted to." Maribel turned to face him, searching his expression. They had spoken only vaguely of children before, both aware of the shadows Theodore had cast over such possibilities. "I'd like that," she admitted. "But I'm afraid. What if I don't know how to be a good mother? What if the damage he did to me—" "You're not damaged," Zach interrupted firmly. "Changed, yes. Stronger for what you've survived. But not damaged." He cradled her face in his hands. "You have so much love to give, Maribel. I see it every day in how you care for this home, for Esther, for the strays that find their way to our door. Any child would be blessed to have you as their mother." His faith in her brought fresh tears to her eyes. How do you always know exactly what I need to hear?" Zach smiled, thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Because I pay attention. Because you matter to me." He kissed her forehead. "We don't have to decide anything now. We have time." But as winter gave way to early spring, Maribel began to suspect that time had made the decision for them. The familiar symptoms were impossible to ignore: the morning sickness, the tenderness, the subtle changes in her body. She had experienced them once before, early in her marriage to Theodore, before a particularly brutal beating had taken that hope from her. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, partly from superstition and partly from lingering fear. But as her certainty grew, so did her joy, until one evening she could contain it no longer. Zach had just returned from checking on a newborn calf, his face ruddy from the March wind. Maribel met him at the door with a cup of hot coffee and the news that would change their lives forever. "I'm with child," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. For a moment, Zach seemed frozen, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Then his eyes widened, filled with wonder and disbelief. "Are you certain?" Maribel nodded. "Almost 3 months along, I think. The baby will come in late summer or early fall." The cup was hastily set aside as Zach swept her into his arms, lifting her feet clear off the floor in his excitement. "A baby. Our baby." His joy was so pure, so unrestrained, that it washed away any lingering doubts Maribel might have harbored. When he set her down, his expression grew more serious. "Are you happy about this?" "Truly, I am," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it over her still, flat stomach. "I never thought I'd have this chance again, after what happened before." Understanding darkened Zach's eyes. She had told him about the baby she had lost, the cruelest of Theodore's many cruelties. "This time will be different," he promised. "This time you're safe. Both of you." Their departure for Colorado was postponed until after the birth. Neither wanted to risk the journey with Maribel in a delicate condition, and Esther insisted on being nearby for the delivery. As spring bloomed across the land, so did Maribel. Her body rounded with new life, her skin took on a luminous quality, and a peacefulness settled into her spirit that amazed even her. The nightmares came less frequently, and when they did, the reassuring presence of her child growing within her helped chase away the shadows. Zach sold most of their cattle to a neighboring rancher, but kept their horses and essential equipment. He worked tirelessly to ensure the ranch would be in good condition for its new owners, all while lavishing attention on Maribel. No task was too small or too tedious if it contributed to her comfort. He built a cradle from cottonwood branches, carving intricate designs of stars and mountains into its sides. In July, as Maribel entered her final month of pregnancy, a letter arrived from Colorado. Zach's cousin had been overseeing the inherited property and reported that the main house had been prepared for their arrival, with a room specifically outfitted for the baby they were expecting. "It sounds perfect," Maribel said as Zach read her the letter. They sat on the porch in the cool of the evening, Maribel's swollen feet propped on a stool Zach had made for that purpose. "It does," Zach agreed. "Fresh start, fresh air, and plenty of room for this little one to grow up." He placed a gentle hand on her rounded belly, smiling when he felt a firm kick against his palm. "Strong like their mama." Maribel covered his hand with her own. "And kind, like their papa." The baby arrived on a sweltering August morning after a night of labor that left Maribel exhausted but triumphant. Esther served as midwife, her experienced hands guiding the infant into the world while Zach paced anxiously outside. "A girl," Esther announced, placing the squalling infant on Maribel's chest. "Healthy as can be." When Zach was finally allowed into the room, he approached the bed with reverence, his eyes wide as he took in the sight of his wife and daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's downy head. "Elizabeth," Maribel said. "After my mother." She looked up at her husband. "If that's all right with you." "Elizabeth Rollins," Zach tested the name. "It's beautiful. She's beautiful." His voice broke slightly. "You both are." They remained in New Mexico until Elizabeth was 6 weeks old, giving Maribel time to regain her strength and the baby time to grow sturdy enough for travel. The journey to Colorado would take weeks, and they prepared meticulously, converting their wagon into a comfortable home on wheels with a small covered space where Maribel could nurse and tend to the baby protected from the elements. The day of departure dawned clear and cool, with the first hints of autumn in the air. Esther came to see them off, her arms laden with jars of preserves and bundles of herbs. "For the journey," she insisted, tucking them into the wagon. "And this," she pressed a small package into Maribel's hands, "is for little Elizabeth when she's older." Something to remember where she began. Inside the package was a delicately embroidered handkerchief with the baby's initials and birth date, surrounded by desert flowers. "Esther, it's beautiful," Maribel said, embracing the older woman who had become like family. "You write to me," Esther commanded, wiping away tears. "Let me know how my girls are doing up north." "We will," Zach promised, securing the last of their belongings. "And you'll visit us when you can." With final embraces and promises to keep in touch, they set off toward the northern horizon. Maribel sat beside Zach on the wagon seat, baby Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in a sling across her chest. As the landscape of their first home together receded behind them, Maribel felt not loss, but anticipation. "Are you ready for this new adventure?" Zach asked, his hand finding hers between them. Maribel smiled, thinking of how far she had come from the broken woman he had found in the dust. "More than ready," she assured him. "With you and Elizabeth, I'm ready for anything." The journey north took nearly a month, with frequent stops to rest and care for the baby. They traveled through changing landscapes, desert giving way to mountains, scrubland to forests each mile, taking them further from the shadows of the past and closer to the future they were building together. When at last they crested the final ridge and saw the valley spread before them, Maribel gasped. The ranch was larger than she had imagined, with lush pastures bordered by pine forests and a clear river winding through the property. The main house, built of solid timber, stood proudly on a small rise, smoke curling from its chimney. "Welcome home," Zach said softly as he guided the horses down the slope toward their new life. Zach's cousin, Daniel, met them in the yard with a warm welcome and news that he had hired a local woman to help with the house for the first few weeks while they settled in. The interior of the house was simple but well built, with large windows that filled the rooms with light. The nursery, as promised, had been prepared with a proper crib and rocking chair. That night, after Elizabeth had been fed and settled in her new room, Maribel and Zach stood on the porch of their new home, arms around each other as they gazed up at the Colorado stars. "Happy?" Zach asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Completely," Maribel assured him. "I never imagined I could have this kind of happiness again. You gave me back my life, Zachary Rollins." "No," he corrected gently, turning her to face him. "You saved yourself. You found the courage to flee when staying meant death. All I did was offer a safe place when you needed it most." He cupped her face in his hands. "You rebuilt yourself from the broken pieces he left behind, and I've been privileged to witness it." Maribel stretched up to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We've come so far from that day you found me in the dust," she murmured. "And we have so far yet to go," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "Together." As if in agreement, a cry sounded from inside the house, Elizabeth demanding attention. They went inside hand in hand, ready to tend to their daughter, ready to face whatever challenges their new life might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face them together. Years passed, and the Rollins ranch prospered. Maribel and Zach worked side by side to build a home and a business that thrived despite the harsh Colorado winters and occasional dry summers. Elizabeth grew from a baby to a toddler to a spirited young girl with her mother's resilience and her father's gentle heart. 2 more children joined the family, a son named James, born 3 years after Elizabeth, and another daughter, Sarah, 2 years after that. Their home rang with children's laughter and the everyday sounds of a family growing together in love and security. Maribel never forgot where she had come from or the strength it had taken to forge this new life. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, she would take out her mother's locket and the few mementos she had from that time, tangible reminders of how far she had traveled, both literally and figuratively. Word eventually reached them that Theodore Barnes had died in prison, a fact that Maribel acknowledged with quiet reflection rather than celebration. His power over her had ended long before his life did, and she found she could even feel a measure of pity for a man who had never known what true love meant. On the 10th anniversary of the day Zach had found her collapsed in the New Mexico dust, they sat together on the porch of their Colorado home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," Maribel admitted, her head resting on Zach's shoulder. "That we built all this together." Zach's arm tightened around her. "Believe it," he said simply. "You deserve every moment of happiness, Maribel Rollins. And I intend to spend the rest of my days making sure you have it." As their children called for them to join their game, Maribel and Zach rose together, hand in hand, stepping forward into the life they had created, a life built on the ashes of pain but sustained by the enduring power of love, respect, and the courage to begin again. In the years that followed, the legend of Maribel and Zachary Rollins grew throughout the region. Not the story of a broken woman rescued by a cowboy, but of two strong individuals who had found in each other the perfect partnership. Their ranch became known for its hospitality to those in need, particularly women seeking refuge from situations like the one Maribel had escaped. More than once, a battered woman would arrive at their door, sometimes alone, sometimes with children in tow. Each was welcomed, given shelter and support until they could stand on their own feet again. Maribel worked with local authorities to ensure these women received legal protection, drawing on her own experience to help others find their path to freedom. Zachary, for his part, became known as a man whose word was his bond and whose ranch was a haven of fairness in a sometimes brutal land. Their children grew up understanding the value of compassion and the importance of standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. By the time Elizabeth was preparing for her own marriage to a young rancher from a neighboring property, the Rollins Ranch had expanded to include a small school where Maribel taught the children of ranch hands and nearby homesteaders. The skills her father had passed to her as a schoolteacher's daughter now benefited a new generation. On the evening before Elizabeth's wedding, Maribel found her daughter standing on the porch, gazing at the stars much as Maribel herself had done so many times. "Nervous?" Maribel asked, joining her daughter. Elizabeth smiled, so much like her father in the quiet confidence she radiated. "A little, but mostly excited. Thomas is a good man." "Yes, he is," Maribel agreed. Thomas reminded her of Zach in many ways: his steadiness, his respect for Elizabeth's independence, the gentleness beneath his strength. "I want what you and Papa have," Elizabeth confessed. "The way you look at each other, even after all these years. That's what I want." Maribel took her daughter's hand. "It didn't come easily, you know. Real love rarely does. It takes work and honesty and the courage to be vulnerable with another person." She paused, considering how much to share with her daughter on the eve of her wedding. "Before I met your father, I was married to another man. A man who hurt me in every way a person can be hurt." Elizabeth's eyes widened. She had known her mother had been married before, but the details had never been shared. "What happened?" "I finally found the courage to run away. I was nearly dead when your father found me. He offered me safety, and later, when I was ready, love." Maribel squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'm telling you this not to frighten you, but because I want you to know that you always have choices. That you deserve to be loved completely and respected absolutely. And that if Thomas or any man ever treats you with less than the full measure of both, You have somewhere to come home to. Elizabeth embraced her mother tightly. Thank you for telling me, she whispered. And for showing me, through you and Papa, what love is supposed to look like. From the doorway, Zach watched his wife and daughter with a heart full of gratitude. The years had left their mark on both him and Maribel, silver threading through her dark hair, lines of experience etched around his eyes, but the bond between them had only deepened with time. Later that night, after the house had quieted and their younger children were asleep, Zach found Maribel in their bedroom, unpacking the dress she would wear to Elizabeth's wedding. Our girl's all grown up, he said, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Maribel leaned back against his chest.
She is.
And she's marrying a man worthy of her. We did good, didn't we? Zach's voice held a note of wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe the life they had built together. We did, Maribel agreed, turning in his arms to face him. Thank you for finding me that day, Zachary Rollins. He smiled, the same smile that had warmed her heart for 20 years. Best thing I ever did, finding you in the dust. His expression grew more serious. Do you ever regret it? Coming with me? Building this life? Never, Maribel said firmly. Not for a single moment. She reached up to touch his face, the familiar planes and angles as dear to her as her own reflection. You saved my life by offering me a safe place when I needed it most. But you gave me so much more than safety, Zach. You gave me love without conditions, respect without reservation, and the freedom to become the woman I was meant to be. Zach caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. And you gave me a family, a purpose beyond myself, and the kind of love I never thought I'd find in this world. He drew her closer. I'd do it all again, every moment, every challenge, every joy if it meant ending up right here with you. As the moon rose over their Colorado home, casting silver light through the windows, Maribel and Zachary held each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and the love that had transformed two wounded souls into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have become alone. The next day, as they watched their daughter pledge her life to the man she loved, their hands remained clasped together, a testament to the enduring power of love that begins with a simple act of kindness and grows, through courage and commitment, into a legacy that ripples outward to touch countless lives. For Maribel, who had once fled a house of bruises with nothing but the desperate hope of survival, the greatest miracle wasn't just that she had lived, it was that she had found, in the vast wilderness of the West and the heart of a gentle cowboy, not merely a safe place, but a home where love could flourish and heal even the deepest wounds. And for Zachary, who had once been a solitary man with only his horses and his land for company, the simple act of stopping to help a stranger in distress had led to a life richer and more meaningful than he could have imagined, proof that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single step towards someone in need. Together, they had written a new story, one not defined by pain or loss, but by the courage to begin again and the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received.